How you doing? I'm Thomas Nyback. This is 365 Days Towards Racial Change. We're here talking about black issues in America, being black, but we're not looking and parsing out the current events necessarily. They come up once in a while, much rarely lately, but looking at historical facts, impact today, what that looks like today, um, and what we could be as a community in the future. This is just my little love pet project, and we're just wrapping up here. A couple more episodes to go, and pleasure. I'm thankful to all who have watched and commented. So I got some on the email list. Others I know watch this. I watched the subscribers go up. So, with our 20 some more spots to go, we're just good. I'm probably just going to collapse after it, but I'm glad I took this on. The intent was to do it all in the for 2019, but then I got a crazy idea. I was in this very unique opportunity situation to finish my degree in philosophy. So I moved resources around, and I couldn't finish in that time frame. But I'm glad because it's actually fortunate that this project has overlapped with the coronavirus, because the virus has helped to really affirm and validate some of the racist issues alive in America that have sway on future of black folks, poor folks. We're going to be talking about our brothers and sisters, the Navajo Nation, coming up shortly. But it's just interesting to see how, racism, marginalization, holding people into at a certain space socioeconomically. This virus has shown us how devastating that attitude is, and I'm hoping that everybody that's been negatively impacted because of socioeconomic racist reasons find a voice, decide to collectively make their moves and to do something about what's going on, because it's just not right. CNN, I watch a lot of CNN versus Fox and Friends. I'm not going to go too much into why, but watch a lot of CNN, and I'm watching these doctors and professors, mostly white. And, they found this white doctor to talk about the black people being disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus. But it's not a direct thing. It's one of these sleight of hands in the media that I've noticed the media does. They attach the vulnerabilities to some peripheral issues like obesity, hypertension, um, pre-existing conditions and stuff like that, and want to steer the conversation away from the socioeconomic roots that makes a group of people more susceptible to disease than another. You know, if I'm living in a nice house in the wintertime, well supplied, warm, I'm going to do all right. But I can't curse the individual sleeping in a lean-to exposed to the elements because they got frostbite. That's not it's not a good comparison to um, the state, of a person's vulnerability, their state of health. That's not fair at all. And the media, I've seen it, turn the corner a little bit and not be so revealing and educational about why one group is doing better than another group in this pandemic. And I'll admit, I do very well. The virus didn't jump on me or people in my community that much. I'm just in another situation. I live in a group living type thing. But for the inner city, if you're in closer proximity, sharing more um, atmosphere and things like that, yeah, that's going to make you a little more susceptible to what's going on in the world. So, that's something to think about as you review these and maybe other videos and blogs about the coronavirus. Watch out for the media. I like CNN. I feel like they're like the most professional, but sometimes they slip to the side a little bit on the messaging, and they don't stay on point with the reasons for some conditions that are going on the planet. I am inspired to do this work by Dr. Claude Anderson. I've tried to contact him. Maybe I'll meet him someday. Anyway, I really just want to thank him for his work that he has done on this issue. I'm just copying what he and a lot of other people, men and women, have laid down before me. But it's his work we reference the most here at Racial Change. So today at 342, I'll give him his shout out and a couple other guys, people I know. Dr. Anderson wrote this great book. This really lit a fire under me because it affirmed a whole lot of things that were going on with me when I got introduced to his material back in 2018. A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask, Black Labor, White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice, and Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America, Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson at powernomics.com and here on YouTube. It's easy to find. It's all over the place. Behind me, you see the hashtag #UsTooSimple. You'll find Black women supporting one another, having their community. Check out Black Enough, BLAGGENUF. Just type it in and it'll come up. I forget the extension on that. If you can't find your flavor here on the World Wide Web, do what I did, start your own. If you've got a business mind, check out Dr. Boyce Watkins at the Black Business School, theblackbusinessschool.com. He's got a lot of great products to help you out there. Also, Tyrone Gregory, the self-employed tax guy, real good guy. I talked with him on the phone, and I'm about to hook up with him again as soon as I get some momentum going in my space. Speaking of money, if you want to understand the Federal Reserve, how money works in America and around the globe, The Creature from Jekyll Island will get you going in the right direction. G. Edward Griffin wrote that book. And today, something we're going to see a little more of as we wind down. We'll have some more story time coming up with Uncle Tom's Cabin. We are actually in the book today. I won't give you a page number because it's, I don't know what edition book I have. I have a nice annotated big edition with, I can put a lot of notes in the margins if I really want to and whatnot. But so we've gone through the whole text, but I just want to drop in, just take a parachute, parachute into some familiar lands and review some of the slave life. Remember, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote this around mid-1800s, right before the Civil War. And it's a fictional account of slave life. It's a novel. It's a nice journey. But we found out by the end of the book that so much of the book is written, it's a tapestry of actual events that either Harriet Stowe witnessed herself or heard from testimonials of family and friends about how slaves were treated here in the great US of A. As you can imagine, they weren't treated well. And I think I wrote in the description at the bottom of the video here, I think I wrote how, it's a slave life, but, I'm not familiar with any slave's life, any slave story that ends well. That's just the sad, you don't have some triumphant slave thing, for a slave to come out ahead. It usually involves a whole lot of sacrifice has gone on for the slave to succeed wherever they're at. So today we drop in, it's the beginning of the book, and the beginning of the book is really, it's quite innocent to a degree. It starts out with a problem and the challenge. This guy Shelby has gotten into some gambling debts, and now he needs to sell some slaves to pay off his creditors. We find that a theme throughout the book of these slave masters gambling, getting into debt, and having to sell off their slaves. And what that meant is separating families and tearing up the social network of the slave. The slave didn't have a social network, had no social rights. The marriage was not sacred. The slave masters encouraged it. Go like playing house. Go jump brooms, play house, have children, be a family. But now when push comes to shove, if your son is looking strong, if your daughter is ready to breed, their risk goes up exponentially for that master to make some profit. The gambling piece is another thing for the slave culture, because these white men had so much free time. The slaves were told them to work. All he had to do was manage it, and he hired an overseer, a manager for that. So that plantation owner dressed well, ate well, went into town, socialized, gambled, all that stuff for the slave's life. So that's how the book opens. And when we're introduced to Tom, he's having fun. He's respected in the slave community. He's respected by the slave masters as well. Tom's very devout, close to Jesus, has God, can read certain portions of his Bible, man of prayer, devoted to his wife, all these things. right? All of the values taught to him by the white establishment, he adhered to, believed in, he lived and died by it, as we found out later by the end of the book. But we come in this scene that we're going to talk about today, which is kind of light because we're not going to get too, jammed up into some of the pitfalls and negativity inherent in slave life, right? This is actually probably one of the few moments in Harriet's book where we're kind of in the eye of the storm, so to speak. We've been walking through the woods. I grew up in the woods, and sometimes when you get off the path, you have to navigate all kinds of small brush, and it scratches you, and it breaks your skin, and you're crawling through there, and you lost the trail, and then all of a sudden break out into a meadow. And this is early on in one of the meadows in Harriet Beecher Stowe's book. A big chunk of it is pain, sorrow, death, running, and all that. It's an evening at Tom's, and Tom, it's at the end of the day, and the work is done for the day. Tom is one of the top slaves, so he's done his part and probably more on the plantation. He's respected. His wife, named Chloe, she works at the big house, watching Mass's children, cooking the meals all day. Now she has the unfortunate responsibility, like so many black mothers, but all mothers, single mothers without means, as she works all day somewhere caring for the white establishment, then has to come home and then continue nurturing and feeding, and there's no sense of her space and time. I saw my mother do that, and I wish I had the wisdom, the maturity to know how wrong that is. But that's something that continues on in the community, and it touches all people, regardless of color, I'm sure. I just want to acknowledge that. So it's an even at times, and Tom, like most men, the men with, at least some sense of allegiance. Now, they were slaves on a plantation, so there's some security in those two keeping connected. I don't think divorce among slaves was a big thing back then. You go who Master puts you with. Hopefully you'll fall in love. So Tom, is like any other man, comes out of the fields, sit down his needs, and he's going to repose in some other area of the cabin. Now it was a cabin, and it actually historically, this is a real place marked as Uncle Tom's Cabin, or at least the story from where the place from where this story originates. But it wasn't like some home with rooms, right? It was probably just a big open space where they were fortunate enough, and the Shelbys were wealthy enough that they didn't cram families into the same space. They probably had some furniture, table, bed, right? This is Kentucky, so slaves were treated kind of better. It's like as you went further south is where you get some of the animalistic kind of care. aimed at the slaves, which we see later on in the book. Tom's last space is, um, a dirt floor with hay, right? No changes of clothes. He has to make his own uh, corn cakes after hard work. But up in Kentucky, it's a lot different in his marriage. In this time, it's this family time here in the book. Um, if you remember, Eliza has just heard that her son and Tom will be sold, and selling slaves on the plantation. You didn't get a whole lot of notice, right? Sometimes you could be taken out of bed, out of the field during the workday. You know, when it was the master decided that you got sold, it didn't. You um, don't necessarily have time to prepare. Tom actually did. He had a relationship where he did actually prepare, pack, and things like that, although all his stuff was taken later on. So at this evening meal time, uh, they have it he's with his family. He's got three little boys. Chloe's cooking, but she doesn't mind it. She likes cooking. Excuse me, anyway. But there's another character there. This is another George. This is young George Shelby. Um, this is Master Shelby's son named George. There's a bunch of Georges as this book starts out. I was so confused. I said, man, why she got three characters named George? Maybe she was anticipating 10,000 men named George, the Pullman porters, or just the black army of men that were porters on the Pullman cars, the train franchise, and stuff like that. And they were all nicknamed George. Right? So the white passengers just said, "Hey, George," and a black man would come running, even though his name was Methuselah. They were all named George. So she had me thrown off a little bit, but it took me a while to get it straight. So young George actually has a very close relationship with Tom, and Harriet Beecher still has two of these relationships. One a white boy and Tom, one little white girl and Tom. These are all healthy relationships, um, very nurturing. There are a lot of caring went on in these relationships. Um, it was healthy, and it's a reflection of, of some aspects of slavery that were maybe even almost enigmatic, because, I mean, you look at today's world, today's society does not encourage an intimacy necessarily between black men and little white children, right? But Harriet's book has shown us that it wasn't always so. This trepidation, suspicion, and all that um, that can the stereotypical fear and stress that is demonstrable to some degree in American society. And during the slavery times, that was a trusted relationship, right? And so little George Shelby, he visited Tom's home often. He participated in these dinners often. He spent time with Tom often, right? And I think it's a reflection, though, um, something that Harriet maybe unintentionally put into her own work here is that Mr. Shelby was a gambler. He was not the most responsible man where he was put in a position to lose his best. Right, Tom is his best slave. Right, and the little George, Eliza's son. I'm sorry, little Harry. Okay, there's only two Georges. Little Harry, Eliza's son, is he entertains. He's a light-skinned boy, mulatto boy with long, kind of maybe almost feminine hair. His hair hangs down, right? Because there's a lot of white breeding in Eliza, and Harry's father has a lot of white mixture in him, and it caused Harry's hair to fall down, like white folks, and it made him just such a valuable prize potential for his looks and probably his potential and strength as a slave. Still a slave, even though the mulatto, quadroons, octoroons are offspring of white slave masters or white black unions. They are still slaves, not free. That's another thing. Maybe we'll talk about that a little more. But anyway, he's like very this relationship between Tom and young George, it's very healthy, and so young George may feel some affinity to Tom's dedication, to Tom's devotion, right? I spent a lot of time away from home, especially when my parents separated, because home was not just a healthy, strong place to be anymore. With the breakup of the family, now we had to navigate a lot of that stuff. It took years for some of that stuff to fall back. In a way, I was angry. Parents were angry and confused. Stresses on the family that were phenomenal were happening, right? So little young George is probably, I'm thinking, the way he's oriented in the story is that, his father gambled away the plantation's best. And, what kind of man is that to want to be around, look for nurturing, guidance, and all that? So young George, it's probably one reason why young George has gravitated towards Tom and has, made that relationship, nurtured that relationship, so much so that later in the book, at the end of the story, not a spoiler alert because we already talked about the whole book, but later in the story, he finds that we find young George has searched all over creation to find Tom to bring him back to the plantation. Although he's too late, Tom has been beaten to death, and George is so overwhelmed emotionally that he knocks Tom's new slave owner on his backside with one punch because he loved Tom so much. That's how dynamic that relationship was, right? So the point is, as I wrap up here, is that you know, the relation between black and white people could be so blissful and heavenly. It's so sad that the nation has this history and that there are still these challenges and issues in the land. But we can look at history, we can see the path generally taken versus the potential that we gave away in a lot of instances. Long way to go, long way to go. That's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Just to shoot in, look in there, review, reminisce, have some nostalgia every once in a while. I'll let you go. Listen, I'm about to run out of time. My name is Tom Nyback. 365 days toward racial change. Thanks for being with me again. That's day 342 in the can. See you next time. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.